Dan Orlovsky watched Shedeur Sanders mime his way into viral chaos and instantly hit the panic button. "This doesn't help him," Orlovsky said, criticizing the pre-Vikings sideline spectacle like Sanders had just torched his entire career in pantomime. It was a swift, brutal takedown, one that echoed across sports talk panels within hours. Because let's be honest, a third-string quarterback pulling mime stunts before an NFL game?
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
That's the kind of thing that screams red flag to a lot of analysts. Except they miss something big. That performance wasn't random. It was a direct response to Rex Ryan, who just days earlier had called out Shedeur's maturity, effort, and overall readiness for the league. This wasn't sideline clowning. It was a message. A no words needed, all eyes on me protest delivered in silence and smirks. Aimed right at Ryan. And once that connection clicked, the media had to walk it all back. The hot takes cooled fast. The criticism turned into curiosity. Was Shedeur actually pulling off a brilliant PR move in disguise? Had he, somehow, found a way to hijack the NFL's attention cycle without saying a single word or throwing a single pass? This is the game Sanders is playing. Not just football, but perception. He's a fifth-round QB, not a star. A name in the headlines more for who his dad is than what he's done in the league so far. And that means he's operating in survival mode. Every second on camera has to count. The mime wasn't just defiance, it was positioning. It said, "I'm here. I know what you said. And I'm not playing your game, I'm playing mine." Rex Ryan may have sparked the moment, but Orlovsky helped fuel the narrative that followed. And in doing so, he helped Sanders flip what could have been a moment of ridicule into a case study in narrative control. Shedeur didn't speak, but he made everyone talk. And now, the conversation's no longer about his draft round or clipboard duties. It's about whether he just pulled off the boldest move of any rookie this season. With the London game looming, this drama isn't over. Sanders' performance, if he gets the chance, will either prove that he's got the talent to back up the branding, or it'll reinforce every doubt critics like Orlovsky and Ryan have voiced. Either way, the mime worked. He bought himself time, attention, and narrative power. Not bad for a guy who hasn't taken a meaningful snap. Dan Orlovsky didn't hesitate. He saw the clip, Shedeur Sanders on the sidelines before the Vikings game, standing silent, arms raised in a pantomime, eyes locked on the camera, and jumped straight to judgment. No hesitation. No context. Just pure condemnation. To Orlovsky, it was immature, unnecessary, unprofessional. He went on air and questioned whether Sanders had any idea what he was doing. A third-string quarterback in the NFL, Orlovsky argued, doesn't have the luxury of pulling stunts. Not when his future in the league depends on being taken seriously. Not when there are already questions about whether he belongs at all. It was a bold take. One that spread fast. Because this wasn't just some no-name backup doing something quirky. This was Shedeur Sanders. A fifth-round pick with a famous last name, carrying the weight of expectation and the target of skepticism. And in the NFL, especially at quarterback, perception is currency. So when Shedeur put on the mime act before the game, it looked, at first, like he was throwing that currency away. Like he was giving critics everything they needed to bury him. But within 48 hours, everything changed. The clip had already gone viral. But then came the context. And once that context hit the media cycle, Orlovsky's take started to look like a misfire. Because Shedeur's mime wasn't random. It wasn't aimless. It was a direct, deliberate response to Rex Ryan, another NFL analyst, who had recently gone on air and questioned Shedeur's maturity and work ethic. Not subtly. Not cautiously. Rex Ryan had laid into him, casting doubt on whether Sanders had the mindset, the professionalism, or the discipline to ever become an NFL quarterback. Those are heavy accusations for any player, but for a rookie trying to prove he's more than a name, it's potentially career-altering. So Shedeur responded. Not with a soundbite. Not with a defensive tweet. Not with a clip from practice. He responded with silence. A silent mime. No words. No smile. No smirk. Just a moment, broadcast to millions, where Shedeur made it clear he heard the criticism, and he would answer it in his own way. And once that clicked, the narrative flipped. Orlovsky's take now looked hasty, premature, like a guy stuck in an old-school mindset who misread a new-school move. Because what Shedeur did wasn't immaturity, it was strategy. Not just a reaction to a critic, but a calculated play in a much bigger game. And let's be clear, Shedeur is playing a bigger game. He's not just fighting for reps, he's fighting to stay relevant. Because in the NFL, especially when you're buried on the depth chart, being visible can be just as important as being ready. There are hundreds of players trying to prove themselves every week, but only a few ever make headlines. Shedeur? He made headlines without playing a down. And that's what makes this so compelling. He turned what looked like a viral joke into a strategic maneuver. A nonverbal response that said, I see what's being said about me. And I'm not going to fight back with words. I'm going to take your narrative and twist it into mine. That's high-level media awareness. And let's not forget the pressure Shedeur is under. Being drafted in the 5th round is already an uphill battle. Being a third-string quarterback means your opportunities are limited and your room for error is non-existent. And being the son of Deion Sanders? That adds an entirely different level of scrutiny. There's no space for mistakes. No space for overreactions. Every move, every post, every interview gets amplified, dissected, and turned into a headline. That's the environment Shedeur has to navigate. And with that mime, he showed he knows exactly how to play the media at its own game. But this is where the stakes rise. Because now, all eyes are on London. The Browns are set to face off in a high-stakes international game, and the quarterback situation is far from settled. Dillon Gabriel is starting, but there's no guarantee he finishes. The offense has been shaky. The pressure is mounting. And Shedeur? He's waiting in the wings, closer than ever to getting his shot. And if he does? If Shedeur steps onto that field and plays well, even for a single quarter, it changes everything. That Mime moment becomes a career pivot. The critics look foolish. The context becomes legend. And Shedeur, once questioned for his maturity, is suddenly praised for his control, his confidence, and his foresight. But if he struggles? If he underperforms? If the spotlight burns too bright? That same moment will be used against him. The Mime will be reframed as ego, as premature, as a symbol of style over substance. That's the risk he took. And that's what makes this story so much more than a viral clip. Because Shedeur isn't just playing football. He's managing perception. He's navigating the modern NFL, where players aren't just judged on the field, they're judged on how they present themselves, how they respond to criticism, how they handle pressure. In that way, the Mime wasn't a distraction. It was a masterclass in message control. And Dan Orlovsky missed it. He saw a moment and filled in the blanks. But he didn't wait for the full picture. He didn't ask whether Shedeur had a reason. He didn't consider that there might be a deeper strategy at play. And now, as the context has emerged and the story has developed, Orlovsky's words feel less like insight and more like an overreaction. That's the danger of modern sports commentary. The rush to be first often overtakes the responsibility to be right. And in Shedeur's case, that rush came with a price, one that Orlovsky's credibility is now paying. Because let's be honest, no one's talking about Shedeur's depth chart spot anymore. They're talking about how he responded to criticism. They're talking about the bigger message behind a simple gesture. And that's a win. Whether or not Shedeur takes a snap in London, whether or not he proves himself on the field, one thing is already clear: he's changed the way people talk about him. He's flipped the narrative from, does he belong here, to, what's he going to do next? That's power. And it's rare for someone so early in their career to wield that kind of influence. But Shedeur has done it. With silence. With precision. With purpose. So now we wait. Will London be the moment Shedeur turns potential into production? Or will it expose the risk behind the strategy? Either way, this isn't just a story about a viral mime. It's a story about control. Who has it, who wants it, and what it takes to keep it. And Shedeur Sanders, whether his critics like it or not, is the one holding the pen. So what do you think? Was Dan Orlovsky too quick to judge? Was Shedeur Sanders playing chess while everyone else was reacting to checkers? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more breakdowns of the moments where sports meets spectacle, where athletes rewrite their own narratives in real time, hit subscribe. Because in today's NFL, the game isn't just played between the whistles. It's played in every headline, every soundbite, and every silent statement. The moment Shedeur Sanders raised his hands in silent defiance, he didn't just respond to criticism, he changed the entire conversation. It's rare for a third-string quarterback to control a media cycle without throwing a pass, but Shedeur did it without even speaking. And Dan Orlovsky? He walked straight into the trap. Orlovsky, like so many traditional analysts before him, saw the Mime clip, paused for exactly 0 seconds, and launched into a critique that felt less like analysis and more like projection. He saw a quarterback who wasn't acting like a quarterback should, at least, according to the outdated handbook of NFL respectability. And for Orlovsky, that was enough to go in. Full heat. Full disapproval. Full dismissal. He framed it as a cautionary tale. This isn't how a quarterback behaves. You're fighting for your future in this league. How does this help your chances? He painted Shedeur as unserious, immature, too concerned with going viral and not concerned enough with the playbook. But the problem? That story unraveled fast. Because within 2 days, it came out that Shedeur wasn't just fooling around. He was making a statement. A strategic, controlled, nonverbal response to being publicly called out by Rex Ryan, who had gone on record questioning Sanders' maturity and commitment. And suddenly, the unserious act started to look like a smart, silent checkmate. Rex Ryan's comments weren't subtle. He questioned whether Shedeur had the right mindset for the league, whether he was willing to grind, to sacrifice, to grow. In a league obsessed with grit and stoicism, those comments carry weight. Especially when you're a rookie. Especially when you're not starting. Especially when you're the son of Deion Sanders. Because legacy works both ways. For some, it opens doors. For others, it raises the bar so high that anything less than perfection is seen as entitlement. And for Shedeur, that's been the tightrope. He didn't just enter the NFL with pressure, he entered with a spotlight so hot it could burn through any mistake. And Rex Ryan knew what he was doing. He threw down a gauntlet. But what he, and Orlovsky, didn't expect was that Shedeur would pick it up without even saying a word. That Mime wasn't immaturity. It wasn't self-sabotage. It was message delivery, executed in real time, on a national stage, during a pre-game moment when most players are stretching and zoning out. Shedeur knew exactly where the cameras would be. And he delivered the most deliberate performance of his young career. And it worked. It sparked outrage, confusion, debate. Analysts rushed in with their takes, fans chimed in, the clip made its way through every major sports page, and by the time the context emerged, the conversation had already evolved. People were no longer talking about whether Shedeur belonged in the league. They were talking about whether his brand of quiet confidence was something the NFL was ready for. And Orlovsky? He was left holding a cold take with nowhere to go. That's what makes this moment bigger than a Mime routine. It's not about the gesture, it's about who got outplayed. Orlovsky represents the old-school mindset. The belief that quarterbacks should stay quiet, play hard, and speak only when spoken to. That perception management is for wide receivers and Instagram influencers, not field generals. But Shedeur represents the new era. Athletes who understand media just as well as they understand coverages. Players who know that controlling the story is just as important as controlling the pocket. And the scary part for Orlovsky? Shedeur played the game better. He let Orlovsky rant. He let the media react. He let Twitter implode. And then, when the full story surfaced, that this was a calculated, silent rebuttal to direct criticism, he still said nothing. Because at that point, he didn't need to. The internet did the rest. And that's where we are now, at the collision point of the traditional NFL code and the modern athlete's media savvy. Shedeur didn't break the rules, he rewrote them. But let's not pretend this comes without risk. Because the London game is approaching, and whether or not Shedeur gets on the field, that moment will linger. If he plays and performs, the Mime becomes myth. A legend-in-the-making origin story of a kid who silenced the critics with actual silence. But if he falters? If he gets a shot and can't execute? That mime becomes ammo. The highlight gets reshared, but not as brilliance, as arrogance. As the moment when a backup quarterback cared more about the camera than the craft. That's the gamble Shedeur made. But here's why it's working. The pressure is already there. Shedeur didn't invent it. He walked into it with eyes open. And instead of ducking it, he leaned in, completely still, completely silent, completely in control. There's a reason we're still talking about this. He made himself unmissable in a position that's designed to disappear. Most third-string quarterbacks don't get media attention unless someone ahead of them gets injured. But Shedeur got it by outsmarting a system that usually eats rookies alive. This isn't clout chasing. This is narrative warfare. And Shedeur's winning. Because now, analysts who dismissed him are backpedaling. Fans who laughed at the mime are rewatching it with new eyes. The clip that once looked like a sideline stunt now reads like a mic drop moment. It's not about going viral. It's about owning the moment. And Shedeur owned it. But the work isn't done. Because no matter how much media savvy you have, no matter how brilliantly you maneuver perception, football still comes down to results. The field doesn't care about symbolism. So when the Browns head to London, all eyes are on whether Shedeur can turn this media momentum into football success. If Dylan Gabriel struggles, and Shedeur steps in, it becomes his real test. That's when the silence has to turn into throws. That's when the message becomes performance. That's when the myth gets written or erased. It's high risk, but so is every step for a fifth-rounder in this league. And that's why this entire saga matters. Because it's about more than a sideline gesture. It's about how young athletes are redefining professionalism, redefining visibility, and forcing the league to catch up to their era. And Shedeur Sanders? He's not waiting for the NFL to accept him. He's carving out his space whether they like it or not. And that's the part that's still driving people crazy. The fact that Shedeur Sanders didn't say a single word, didn't explain himself, didn't clarify the gesture, and still ended up winning the moment. He didn't play defense. He played offense, in silence, and left analysts scrambling to catch up. Dan Orlovsky tried to define the narrative before it had time to breathe. And for a while, he owned it. Shedeur's mime was instantly interpreted as immature, as clownish, as some Gen Z gimmick with no place in the serious world of the NFL. For a solid 24 hours, that version of the story ran unchecked. But then the truth dropped. The mime wasn't a cry for attention. It was a cold, calculated reply to Rex Ryan's earlier smear job. And suddenly, Orlovsky wasn't holding the upper hand in the conversation anymore. He was caught mid-sentence in a story that had already evolved without him. And that's the danger of reacting too quickly, especially in today's NFL media landscape. Analysts love to preach patience when talking about rookie quarterbacks. Let them develop. Give them time to adjust. Don't judge too early. But when it came to Shedeur Sanders, none of that applied. Orlovsky and others jumped in without waiting for the full picture. No context. No background. Just a viral clip and a hot take. The irony? Shedeur's entire message, his whole point, was about that rush to judgment. The mime wasn't just for Rex Ryan. It was for everybody who thinks they can sum up a player's character in a 15-second clip. And Orlovsky walked straight into it. The NFL loves its old-school values, humility, hard work, respect. But what it's still learning to deal with is how today's players choose to embody those values. Shedeur didn't throw a tantrum. He didn't disrespect anyone. He didn't lash out or go viral for some wild outburst. He went silent. And somehow, that was too much for the gatekeepers to handle. Let's talk about what that silence actually said. It said, "I don't owe you a traditional response." It said, "I see the narrative being built, and I reject it." It said, "I'll let your words speak for themselves while I stay in control of mine." It was psychological warfare, delivered with poise, timing, and restraint. And in doing that, Shedeur forced people to do what they rarely do when it comes to late-round draft picks. Look deeper. He made the league, the media, and the fans confront their own assumptions. Why is a backup QB expected to stay invisible? Why is confidence mistaken for arrogance the second someone doesn't conform? Why do we mock athletes for branding, then turn around and say they're forgettable? And now, just days before a pivotal game in London, all those questions are sitting in the background as Shedeur Sanders prepares for what could be the most consequential moment of his career so far. The Browns are a mess. The offense is unstable. Dillon Gabriel is walking into that game as the starter, but the leash? It's short. Everyone knows it. If things go sideways early, Shedeur could be called upon. And if that happens, it won't just be a shot to prove he can play. It'll be a shot to prove why everything leading up to this moment mattered. Why the mime wasn't a distraction. Why the silence was strategy. Why the story he built deserves an ending that only he can write. It's not about winning over the critics anymore. That part's done. The critics already showed their hand and lost. The only thing left is whether Shedeur can deliver the kind of performance that turns that silent moment into legend. Because here's what no one wants to say out loud. If he plays well, if he shows poise under pressure, even just flashes of real NFL potential, this whole sequence, the mime, the criticism, the narrative reversal, becomes one of the best brand-building arcs we've seen from a rookie in years. A fifth-round pick who got painted as a distraction, only to use that label as fuel for a breakout performance? That's the kind of story that sticks. That's the kind of story that rewrites your career trajectory. But yes, there's another side to it. If Shedeur flops? If he looks unprepared or overwhelmed? Then all of this, the mime, the media war, the moment, gets reinterpreted as noise. The "he should have focused more on football" crowd comes back with a vengeance. Orlovsky and others get to say, "See? We told you." And that's the gamble Shedeur has walked into. But let's not forget something critical. This is a gamble he chose to take. He didn't back away. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften his approach to make critics feel better. He stood in it. And that tells you everything about how seriously he's taking this moment. Because whether people want to admit it or not, it's easy to fall in line and play the NFL media game. Say the right things. Keep your head down. Avoid headlines unless they come with stats. But Shedeur didn't want to be background noise. He wanted to be seen. Not for the wrong reasons, but for reasons he could control. And that's what makes this whole story so compelling. He's not just trying to make the roster. He's trying to shift the way young players are allowed to shape their own narratives. He's showing that, yes, you can be bold. Yes, you can respond to criticism in your own way. And yes, you can still take the game seriously while refusing to conform to every outdated standard. And if he gets on that field and performs, it all clicks. Everything falls into place. The silence becomes a prelude. The criticism becomes contrast. The story becomes not about what Shedeur did before the game, but what he did when he finally got his shot. So the stage is set. London. The Browns. A restless team. A spotlight that's bigger than any backup should have. And Shedeur Sanders, quietly, confidently, waiting for the moment that just might turn his calculated silence into the loudest statement of all. Let us know where you stand. Was Dan Orlovsky justified in jumping in, or did he miss the bigger picture? Was Shedeur's mime move a power play or a distraction? Drop your takes in the comments. And if you want to follow every twist in stories like this, where football meets branding, media meets ego, and silence becomes strategy, hit subscribe. Because in today's NFL, the story doesn't stop when the whistle blows. It starts long before that, sometimes with a mime.